All right. Hello, Tara. Thank you so much for joining me. I first discovered all of your stuff. I think I found you through Instagram, I want to say, through the Farm Fir Co. But I was looking for a logo that was like specifically equestrian based to kind of shift my focus a little bit more. And then I forget how I stumbled upon your page, but I was so grateful that I did. And I would love for you to just introduce yourself and your vibe and what you do.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you so much for having me. So, my name is Tara, the founder of Farm Fir Co. We are a branding and website design agency specifically for equestrian brands and businesses. That was the niche that we initially launched to. And over the last 5 years or so, we've been expanding a little bit outside of the horse world, but that's still where our tried and true passion lies. And I love that you mentioned that you discovered us through Instagram because really that was the biggest driving force in growing our business from the very beginning. I do a lot of work with Ashley from White Stallion Studio. She's our graphic design partner. So when we initially launched Farm and Fur together, that was really the primary method that we were able to connect with other horse people outside of the New Jersey and Pennsylvania area. So I'm grateful that you were one of those people that came from Instagram.
It's so interesting. And I like, well, we talk a lot about marketing in this and branding, but it is so interesting. Like, that's one of my favorite questions for people. I'm like, how did you find me? And they're like, oh, Instagram. I'm like, I love the algorithm sometimes.
Yes, I know. Some people love to hate on the algorithm, but I think one thing that's so important to remember is that at the end of the day, it is a free marketing resource. So even though it can be a little bit tricky and difficult, we still have to be grateful for it and just take every connection that we can from it.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, social media is I don't know what you like. I was a business owner before social media was huge, but I was like, how did I do that before? I literally went door to door with posters and people in my area. That's what I
The
did.
the
So
old school way. I think
yeah,
they call that door knocking, which, is still important sometimes. I
yeah.
think I think coming out of the pandemic, people really are craving those face-to-face human interactions. So I think the art of door knocking is not lost.
I agree. I agree. I mean, it's harder to put yourself out there, but then you can actually make genuine connections and people like what we say on like social media of like people want to like know the face of the business. Like this is literally my face in person right here.
Yes.
What inspired you to get into your line of work? And especially I love like hearing how like young horse girls made their dreams come true with equestrian businesses.
Yeah, no, it's a really great question. So for about 7 years, I was a full-time barn manager at a private horse farm in Colts Neck, New Jersey, which is where I'm originally from. And before that, I had gone to school for marketing and management, and I always had this little creative fire, but just never knew how to directly apply it. And I never was really fit for a traditional corporate setting. I tried the whole New York City PR thing, and it was not for me. So I think the spark and inspiration really started when I left my corporate job to move to the farm to be a full-time live-in barn manager. But over the years, I spent so much time just connecting with other trainers and local barns and the local feed store and all of these other small businesses in my immediate area who had all started their businesses out of the passion for horses and really struggled to bring in new clients, effectively market themselves. They could make a couple of posts on Instagram and Facebook here and there, but they didn't really know how to drive traffic to their business beyond that. So Ashley and I met because she was the barn manager at the farm before I was. I took her barn
Awesome.
management position. Yes, it's such a crazy story.
I love
I
that.
I worked for her when she was the barn manager, and then we literally switched roles. I became the barn manager, and she worked for me on my day off. So we had this really unique opportunity to both work with each other and for each other. And in so many conversations, just being at the barn together, we just kind of knew that with her background in fine art and my interest in digital design, we were like, we could totally make a go at this. So it really just started by doing a very off the cuff logo for a local therapeutic riding center, which then sparked into me doing some photos for them, which I had no idea how to use a camera. Everything that I learned is just from the school of YouTube. And then eventually it turned into a website. So we had this really unique opportunity to do this kind of very casual, low pressure method of seeing how we could work together, seeing how we could put our creative heads together. And it was such a crazy experience because it both sparked this now 5 years later career that we both operate full time now that we never would have imagined. But, I think the horse industry is so unique in the sense that everyone's audience is so specific and you really need a horse person to know how to market to a horse person. So now to be able to work with so many founders and business owners who have the idea and a perfect foundation, they just need help executing it digitally and from a marketing perspective is so rewarding. And although we do sometimes work with businesses outside of the industry, I think our love and passion will always just stay with that equestrian business owner.
I love there's so many things that you said where I'm like, yes. Like I love every time I talk to an equestrian entrepreneur or just like anyone who runs their own business, it's always like, oh, I didn't really picture myself working a 9 to 5. So now I just work 24 hours and now I work all the time because for some reason that's more appealing than 9 to 5.
Yes, it's that classic saying. It's a saying along the lines of you'll give up working 40 hours a week for someone else to work 80 hours a week for yourself, which I think we can all relate to.
Yes, absolutely. But I do think there is a very specific like equestrian, like we're kind of like a little cult where like if I'm scrolling through Instagram and I see like a logo with a bit or a logo with a horse, I'm immediately like, ooh, what's that? And it like narrows my focus so much more. And that's why I wanted, like when I was reaching out to work with you guys, like I didn't dislike the logo I had before, but I wanted equestrians to be like, ooh, what's that? There's a horse.
Right.
And it does it like it snags our attention immediately, whether we're looking for something or not. So yeah, there is something to be said about specifically working with someone who specializes it with equestrians and horses. And yeah, we know what we focus on.
Yeah, and so many horse people have such a unique and inspiring story behind why they started their business and very often want either a personal horse or something very personal to them represented in their branding. So I think having, Ashley's phenomenal background, being such a great artist and being able to kind of translate those personal photos into a real life logo and just having that deep understanding of the equestrian industry, I think made for a nice combination.
Yeah. Well, even when we were working on my logo, like I was the first or second draft, I forget what it was, but even I was like, could we just have the horse reaching long and low with the neck up? And you're like, yes. But if I asked a non-equestrian person to do that, they'd be like, come again?
Yeah.
Like I want them stretching a little bit instead of like, oh, and,
Right. And we're like, no, we
I
got
had
it.
no idea what I was talking about.
Yes.
So before we deep dive a little bit more, can you explain what exactly branding is?
Yeah, so I love this question because I think a lot of times people expect me to start with words revolving around color palettes and fonts and even logo design, which we already talked about a little bit. But to me, when I think about true branding, it all starts within who you are, what you do, why you do it, who you do it for, and how that overall impacts your end customer or end client. Because to me, it's all about how you effectively communicate all of that, how you position all of that, and that all leads to building that trust and credibility and that know, like, and trust factor with your audience. So, it's funny, a lot of people, when they are building their business and creating their brand for the first time, they will almost feel as though their visual branding feels a little bit disjointed or disorganized. And I always find that when we kind of backtrack and ask those really intrinsic questions of why did you start this in the first place? What makes you and your brand unique from everyone else, and what do you hope to eventually do with your business? When we backtrack and can dig deeper into those questions, it kind of draws out all of these keywords that do a better job of telling the story and who you ultimately want to be known as and known for, and how we can effectively communicate that from a messaging perspective, which translates to the visual perspective.
And that, like, your process when I started working with you guys with your mood board, I was like, oh my gosh, this is really extensive. But it was so, so cool to see what you two took from the information I provided. And then, like, I was like, oh, you just laid my whole like heart and soul out on the page now, like with images. Like, that's how you put it all together. And yeah, it's all of those things like helped you understand what I wanted to provide. And yeah, it was really neat to see what you two took from all of the words and the visuals and like all the stuff that I put out there. It was really neat.
Yeah, those keywords are so important, and I think it's such a helpful exercise for anyone who's struggling with it to go back and think about what are those keywords and key values that you feel represent you and your business, not even thinking about the visual side to
Yeah.
start, because you'll start pulling out words like maybe it's modern, sporty, high impact, which then on the branding side, the visual branding side translates to maybe some bright pops of color, or black and white, monochromatic with an accent color, with a more bold, clean, crisp font that's a really standout font. Or maybe you develop those brand words and you find that you keep coming back to classic,
Yeah.
timeless, soft, which then translates to maybe more hunter colors or more earth tones or a more organic look and feel, a serif font that's kind of like a Times New Roman classic.
Yeah.
So, it is so helpful to start with the messaging and then use that as the foundation to align the visuals that match up with it.
Yeah, no, it's more like, and that's where I think people, there's nothing wrong with jumping on Canva and making a little logo when you're first starting out. But I think if you want to take it to that next level, you need something that pulls you all together. And even like people like know my business for like the golden horse, and like they see a golden horse and they're like, oh, Megan posted something. And like that was portrayed in my logo as well. And it, all of that feel, all of that pulls it together. And I love that.
Yeah.
Something that I saw on Instagram where it was like the best description I've ever seen in terms of like marketing and branding was, marketing is asking your crush on a date, branding is why she would say yes. And I was like, that's what I've been trying to like communicate, because I do mentor like people who are starting their new businesses and wanting to hone in on like a specific area or specific niche, and me trying to explain the importance of like that consistency. So, and people always I think worry about like saying the same thing on Instagram over and over. I'm like, no, that's like there's nothing wrong with that. That's your message.
Yes, 1000%. And I think that's such a clear and concise way to sum it up, because so much of establishing your brand is that storytelling and having the ability to communicate the same message over and over again in different ways that touch your audience at different times, and remembering that not every person sees every single post that you put out there. So if you are feeling as though you have a lack of content, or you have just kind of beaten your messaging into the ground, I promise you there are still people out there who need to hear it. And so much of what you said in that example is great, because one of my favorite marketing quotes is from Seth Godin. He's one of my favorite marketing experts, and he just has all of these great nuggets of quotes and information. And he always talks about building a brand as a set of stories, expectations, relationships, memories that lead to one person's decision to choose a particular product over another. And that example that you mentioned is such a great way of kind of thinking about setting those expectations so that people really build that know, like, and trust factor, and kind of you have that credibility behind you.
Yeah. There was even, I did like a little experiment. I think it was like last January, where like I basically recycled Instagram posts. Like I went back a year and like, what message did I say? And like, I presented it differently. And like, I got a whole new response from people. And like, I think one of them was like, if something is sore, it doesn't necessarily need to be stretched. It needs to be strengthened. And like, I had posted that like 2 years ago. I had posted it a year ago. I posted again recently and got like 3 new clients from that this time. And a lot of people are like, oh, I've already said that, but I have new followers. I have the, like, again, the algorithm like creates different people, sends it different ways. It's
Yes.
nothing wrong with that.
Yes, I completely agree. And again, just having that consistent messaging time and time again, just all leads back to helping people know you for that one thing that makes you really unique and special. Even if it's one little tidbit, if you're kind of the go-to person that everyone knows you for that one specific thing, it gives you the ability to kind of stand out from the crowd and be so memorable, which is so important because everybody wants memorable messaging and a memorable brand. But if you don't have a lot of consistency and you don't consistently share your message over and over again, people won't really understand who you are and what you do, and they may even miss some of the things that you're posting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's even like trademark or words that you use, like, especially when I'm working in the barn with horses, I say like super a lot. And I guess someone at a show heard someone else say, oh, that's super. And they're like, I immediately thought of you.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's what I want to be known for, but super. That's great.
No, that's good because I mean, you just kind of hit the nail on the head with what branding is.
Yeah.
One little word or one little thing instantly triggers the memory of you and your brand in someone's mind.
Yeah.
And if it's at a horse show, even better because
I
hopefully
know.
they say, "Oh, that just made me think of the movement."
Literally, they did. And then that person contacted me and she's like, so this is super weird. And I'm like, super.
See, and yeah, you don't even necessarily need that logo to build your brand. And I think a lot of new businesses kind of get caught up in wanting to have the visuals solidified first, which is very, very important. But I mean, people will kind of trigger that memorable reaction based on what they know you for before they will remember exactly what your branding looks like. So that messaging is just always going to be the most important core foundation.
That's one of the things I wanted to chat about too, is like, what are some of the common mistakes that you see people doing, whether they're like your client or if you're just like scrolling through social media? What are some of the things where you're like, maybe not?
Yeah, so I mean the first big thing really is just that lack of consistency and not even consistency in the way that you're visually presenting yourself, but really just a lack of commitment to the consistency from a marketing perspective. And I always have a little bit of tough love advice on this because to me, it is very, very, very difficult to grow a successful business if you cannot make a commitment to consistently marketing yourself. And unless you are going to invest a lot of money in ads to do it for you, I really don't see another way around it. So I think if you are starting a business, you just have to know getting into it, you have to make that really hard effort to be so consistent. And I would say posting multiple times a week at the minimum. You'll see a lot of marketing experts say even multiple times per day. A lot of people who are starting their business as a side hustle can't always do that. And I understand and have sympathy for that. But I think if you're kind of wondering why you're not having that growth, you do have to take a hard look at how you are marketing yourself and how much time you're putting into that. So that's always the first big thing that I see just from a marketing perspective, because it can kind of get you down a little bit in the beginning if you launch a business and then the products aren't selling or those leads aren't coming in. And it's a little bit difficult to look intrinsically to say, what could I be doing different? But I think that's one of the first things you have to be when you become a business owner is become very self-aware and very honest with yourself about what else you could be doing to make that successful. And then on the visual branding side, one thing I see so often is so many business owners start their business to solve a problem that they are specifically experiencing, whether it be with products on the market not fulfilling their needs, or maybe filling a gap with a service, which I think is how most great businesses do start. You always want to be thinking about what problems you can solve for other people. And especially in a niche industry, if you're having an issue, chances are somebody else is having the same problem too. Where I see things start to go wrong for new business owners is, again, that tunnel vision of only solving the problem for themselves.
Yeah.
And once they start getting their offerings out there, not taking in that customer feedback and refining, or even asking for advice and opinions, and really making sure that even though they started the business for themselves, once you start selling, it immediately becomes all about your customers and your clients.
Absolutely. And I think some people like from my experience, from my line of work, like with more of the fitness industry, like my clientele kind of found me. Like it just kind of worked out that all of a sudden I had a bunch of women in their 50s. A lot of them were single. A lot of them, like their dogs were their whole world, as I sit here with my two dogs. So like I could super relate to that. And it's so interesting where I'm like, and here's my niche. Okay. And then I wanted to specifically work with equestrians and made like a little bit of that shift. But sometimes you just have to be open to what comes at you too. Like you just have to be open to whatever ends up coming, whether that's customer feedback, suggestions, requests, or
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And a lot of those little tidbits that you'll get from customers, even if it just comes from having really natural, casual conversations, especially if you are, let's say, for example, selling a product and you're in a position where you are able to be a vendor at places like Equine Affair, Maryland Five Star, going to some of these shows where you can really, your business as an e-commerce brand really exists online, but where you really get to connect with your customers is during those types of events. And all of those casual conversations that you can start with them can just turn into really organic, new, fun ideas to infuse into your business. So I think being open-minded in that way is so important.
for sure, for sure. So if you have like a new small business owner, they're just getting started, what are a few things that you would find helpful for them to like hone in on and spend their time on?
Yeah, so I would say definitely before you even dive into the visuals, starting with kind of all of those little key points that we touched on in the very beginning, really understanding who you are, what problems you intend to solve, how you can do it, what makes you the most unique person to do that for your customers. And then from there, I think a lot of new business owners understandably kind of have that imposter syndrome when they're first launching, which is so relatable. Sometimes I even still have that too.
Sure.
So I think if you are feeling a little bit of a lack of confidence and that's maybe preventing you from marketing in the way that you really want to, really focus on building that community around you and your brand, talking to as many people as possible, and really you just always want to make sure that if you're not feeling super confident in what you're putting out there, make the experience of interacting with your brand the best that it can be, because that's almost what's going to be more memorable for people. And just always make sure that you are kind of putting that value back into yourself as the founder to continue to believe in yourself to do it, because you're the driving force and people want to connect. And, one thing I always advise to new business owners, whether you're launching a service or an e-commerce brand, I am a huge fan of the founder being a very prominent face behind the brand. I think it is one of the most inexpensive and best ways to really market yourself and sell what you're offering. And people want to connect with people, they want to buy from people. So if you don't have a lot of money to invest in super professional branding or, the best materials for your products, just consistently be that trusting face behind your brand and build connections naturally that way.
I love that. It's what I say too. Like, just show up, literally just show up
Yes.
and show up consistently and make it a point of people feeling like they can connect with you in some way. Because no matter if it's like a service or a product that you're selling, it's still people want to connect. I love that.
Yeah, yeah, people do want to connect. And I think a lot of that can be infused into your branding when you get to the visual side because, we have so many clients that really want like a personal horse or something incorporated into their branding. But to me, unless you have been consistently telling that story and your clients or customers understand where that connection comes into play, there's going to be a little bit of a disconnect in your visuals. So I think that that's actually another common mistake that I see people making is just kind of making their branding all about them and forgetting to tell that story to their audience as to what that connection means, because chances are, especially if it's horse related, your customers are going to relate to it as well.
For sure. You talk about a love for your horse. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What are some things that you have found that people can do to like up their marketing game? So like for me personally, I would say it was like 2 years ago, whenever I started working with Jay, I was like, I made a commitment that I was going to get professional photos done regularly, consistently. And I like, not that it's about followers, but I literally like doubled the followers that I had on Instagram as soon as I started like showing her stuff versus, and like I still share personal stuff too and photos that I've taken, but there was for me a huge difference in when I upped that game and that commitment.
Yes, I love that you mentioned the professional photography because this is something that I think can be so commonly overlooked because there really is, there's so many decisions to make when you first launch a business or building a business. There's so many different things that you want to invest in, need to invest in, and I always think that really great quality photos are one of the most important things to invest in. And I think that people like to see when a brand is kind of investing in themselves so that then they trust to invest in them as well because they want to know that you're going to be there for a while, especially if you're a service provider. And I guess for an e-commerce brand too, because especially if you have a product that they're going to want to purchase again, they want to know that you're going to stick around and that you're really professional and that you're there for the long haul. So I love that you mentioned the photos. One of the other things, and honestly, this is sometimes a polarizing answer. Not everybody likes this answer, but I stand so firm behind this. I goes back to the founder being a forward-facing person behind the brand. If you want to up your marketing game, get on your Instagram stories, talk about who you are, what you're doing, talk to the camera, talk to your audience, record reels, do a day in the life, show people exactly what you do in your business, how your business runs. I think so many people at this point have gotten kind of far from having that perfectly curated Instagram feed. People are craving connection. They want to see the raw and the real. So give it to them.
That's been the hardest thing for me. Even like I've recorded a couple of podcasts where it's just me, and I find it so funny like rewatching because I'm like looking around and like I have like the same thing like standing there talking to the camera. I've done it. I've like started to commit a little bit more, but like the feedback that I have received from that, like every single time I do like a personal like story or recording, like I get messages, I get people like connecting back, and like there is something to be said of like standing there and talking directly to the camera versus just typing it out or making a caption. I have definitely received more feedback and connected with more people doing it that way, even though
Yes.
it's like hi.
It's so hard. I mean, you should have seen me in my old office the first time I tried to record an Instagram story. I probably deleted it and re-recorded it 10 times before I finally put one out there. And I still do that. Like when I get on my stories and I'm like, happy Monday, here's what I'm working on. Sometimes I don't really like exactly what I say and I'll still put it out there, or sometimes
Yes.
I'll go back and maybe refine it and condense it because I can be very long-winded. That's usually why I have to re-record. But I just really think that that also builds your confidence and kind of gives you a way to consistently perfect your craft of how you convey your messaging. And
Yes.
if you can start by doing it in the form of an Instagram story, if you're embarrassed by it, it goes away in 24 hours. The better, the better that you get at talking directly to the camera and your audience, then you transition to recording reels and you just build on it from there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And it's you have to get uncomfortable or get comfortable being uncomfortable. And there, like the a couple of podcast episodes even that I recorded, I was like, I'm not going to post that one. I'm like, no, you're going to post it. You're doing it.
You have
And
to post it.
it's happening.
I
And
mean,
those are the ones I get the most feedback on too, because it is raw and it is unfiltered and I'm laying my heart and soul on the line. And that's what people connect most to. So it's okay if it's not perfect.
yes, and it's it's so hard because I think you always want to think about putting your best foot forward, which you should do when it comes to actually serving your clients or developing your products. But when it comes to this more casual one-to-one connection, I think that that becomes so relatable and that makes people instantly latch on and is very engaging and I am so glad that you still put those episodes together because even if it's just to use them as a funny blooper,
Yes.
in a couple months, I just think there's really something to showing the human side behind your brand.
And I think, like, in my world, my business is connecting with people. Like, people can go work out anywhere. There's a million different places in every city that you can go work out. But for me, like, I form a very deep rooted connection with my clients and I care deeply about them. And I'm so blessed that they care deeply about me. So, me putting myself out there, like, that's what you're going to get is if you're in my world, I care very deeply about you.
Yes, and it gives you the opportunity to bring the experience of what it's like working with you one-on-one when you're with your clients in person and carry that experience through social media so that people can kind of get a little taste of what they can expect in working with you.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. One of the things I tend to be very passionate about because it took me a while to get the hang of it, but I love chatting about work-life balance and especially with equestrian entrepreneurs. If you throw a horse into the mix, it changes work-life balance. But how do you find balance? What do you do for yourself to prevent burnout and all of that?
Yeah, I love that you ask this question and it's funny. My answer now is going to be very different than what it would have been even 6 months to a year ago because
100%.
for the last maybe year, I would say I've been on this pretty big health and wellness journey, really transformed a lot of the things that I do in my personal life. And I think when I started my business, it was a hobby to my full-time job.
Mhm.
But when I went full-time, maybe almost 2 years ago, it all of a sudden became my full-time job. And I tried to still treat it like a hobby, and it became so overwhelming that I did get very burnt out. I offered a ton of different things that didn't even really align with my passion, but I was just trying to find different ways to kind of fill that time and kind of fill that void when my hobby became my full-time job. And it was probably about last winter, I started having these really bad episodes with like long fatigue and did a huge deep dive in the blood work that I did and I did so many things to try to figure out the root cause and what I've essentially deducted from all of the research that I've done and all of the tests that I've done is it was a lot of hormone related issues. So I have
My current
I'm
journey
sure,
right
yeah.
now.
Okay. So, and you know what? I'm sure there's so many other women out there who can relate because, especially if you were working a full-time job and running your business as a side hustle, can be very difficult to listen to your body and not call yourself lazy, but tell yourself that no, this is my literally my body, my cycle, my hormones telling me that I need to change something. And it took a really dramatic, episode of really like a lot of weeks of consistent fatigue for me to kind of get to that rock bottom and make some transformational changes. But I mean, now I do everything from cycle syncing. So my whole it sounds insane if you looked at my calendar, but my whole schedule, the way that I work out, the things that I eat, how I take my meetings, and the work that I schedule for myself are all scheduled around my cycle now.
Yeah. it's it's and I don't think people give it hormones in general enough credit for how that like relates to how your body deals with stress, how stress like can wreak havoc on your hormones. And we were chatting about all the stuff that I had gone through with my horse over the summer, and I'm like, my cortisol levels are, and like I can see it like with the puffy face, I'm exhausted, it's like all of these other symptoms. And so that's been what I've deep dived into. But a lot of the time it means slow down a little bit, which goes against, especially like for millennials, that hustle culture. Like I can hustle, that's not a problem of mine, but slowly starting to learn to slow down. And it was just recently I completely shifted my work schedule so that I'm, instead of working 5 days a week, I'm working six, but I'm working like what I call half days. So instead of like 15-hour days, I have like 5 to 6 like hours where I see clients, and then I have time off because for my business, I tend to work a lot of split shifts when people are available. So I start before they go to work, and then I have a few hours in the afternoon, and then I would pick up again in the evening. And that worked fine when I was younger. And then it was kind of like this last year, I'm like, I am exhausted. And I have Fridays off, and I would get to Friday and I could barely function, and I would kind of quote unquote waste the whole day because I just needed to recharge to like go into it again. So I recently shifted so that I do work more days of the week, but they're in smaller chunks, and finally feel like, okay, I'm not drowning by the end of the week. It's, but I'm very lucky in terms of being like self-employed that I can do that, and that my clients are so lovely that I'm like, can I change your whole schedule upside down? And they're like, yeah, sure. Do what you need to do. I was like, thank you so much.
That's so fantastic that you were able to just completely overhaul your schedule like that
Everything.
before. That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
flipped everyone's world upside down and they just went with me. I was so grateful. But
well, it really speaks to how much they love working with you.
I
You know,
know,
they'll
I
stick
know.
with you through the long haul of everything.
They like, I've had some clients that have been with me for literally almost 12, 13 years. And I've been in like six different locations. I've had many different business names and different, yeah. And they just keep like plucking and like time off for surgeries. And they're like, yeah, we'll be here when you're ready. And like, just like so, so, so grateful for all of that. And that's, yeah, that's become my brand of, hi, once you start with me, you'll be here for 10 years.
Which is great. You have a
Yeah.
lot of longevity in that. That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
it's so lovely. But yeah, and I think people have to be okay with shifting and making it work. And yes, like there's a balance. When I first started, I would start work at 5:30 in the morning, and I would work until like 9:30 at night. And I did have to do that to a certain extent when I first started, but as you get a little bit more mileage under your belt, you do have a little bit more wiggle room to narrow down and make it work for you too. But I do think it's a hard balance when you're first starting, because yeah, you do have to hustle when you're first starting, and you have to make sacrifices, and you will be exhausted, and you can rest later. But
Yes.
it's a
No,
fine line.
it's so true. It's almost like you kind of have to invest that hard work on the front end and
Yeah.
hustle a little bit to get things off of the ground. But it is such a nice reward when you can kind of reflect on that. And people always ask, how do you make time to work out or meal prep? But it's it's like you said, a shift in priorities.
Yes.
It's an hour less at night of Netflix so that I can prep lunches for the rest of the week so that I don't have to order DoorDash. It can
Yes.
be as simple as sacrificing one thing so that you can fit in another that will literally boost your entire productivity for the next couple of days. And I mean, sleep was a huge thing for me too. During different phases of my cycle, I make sure that I wake up at different times. So, like for the 2 weeks after my cycle's done, I feel so energized. I can get up at 6 a.m. That's when I'm the most productive. I'll front load as many projects as I can during that time because I know I will have the energy to get it done. And then it progressively wanes from there. And I just adjust accordingly to make sure that even if I'm getting up at 8 o'clock in the morning, I feel so much better so that I can fully be productive because you can sit and do busy work for as many hours as you want. But if you're not really making transformational strides in what you're doing, what's it all for? give yourself those extra 2 hours of sleep so that you can actually get things done and not just sit at your desk and look busy.
And that's where like success has to look different for each person. And I don't know where this idea came from that if you got up at 4:30 in the morning, that you're a better person than someone who gets up at 8. Like I am not a night owl. I like to be in bed by 9, but I don't necessarily like to wake up at 5 either. I like sleep and
Yeah.
I'm able to give my best self when I get that sleep. But I find it so interesting that, yeah, in that hustle culture, it's like, I'm going to wake up at 4:30 and I'm going to work out even though I'm exhausted. I'm like, that doesn't sound productive or nice for me. And I will not be a nice person throughout the rest of my day if I do that. It's
No, it's so true. In the beginning of the summer, I think it was right around that time, I started seeing a big shift in the millennial influencers that were kind of, that those girl bosses
yeah.
really promoting that hustle culture. And I saw a big shift to all of them literally moving out of the city, buying homes in the
Yeah.
country, moving to
Slowing
slow
down.
living, romanticizing their lives. And what did I do this summer? I built a vegetable garden. I planted a crap ton of flowers and was like, yeah, I'm gonna light a candle just on a Wednesday night dinner and just do those little things that bring me just those little pieces of joy,
Yeah.
which makes me so excited to get up and do it all over again the next day.
Exactly. And that's I've always been an advocate of like I take cream and sugar in my coffee. And even like when I was at the height of like more of a disordered eating, I still took cream and like sugar in my coffee because I'm like, this is a small joy that actually is a very big joy. And will get me out of bed in the morning because I get this.
1000%.
Yes. And if that's because I also woke up at 8 instead of 4 in the morning, I'm okay with that.
Yeah. And guess what? Now you're perfectly primed to get a lot of work done.
Absolutely. And even like workouts, like it doesn't have to be the same intensity every week. And like if your body needs to slow down and have something a little more chill, honor that, give it that. Or even like if it needs rest, let it have rest.
Yeah.
It's a hard, again, especially from millennials, because I feel like we got really, really, really hammered with that hustle culture. But learning to slow down and listen is hard, but it's really, really cool to see the how much more productive you can be when you honor that.
Yes, 1000%. And I am seeing a shift in the conversation
Yeah.
around. So I'm hopeful now that things will change a little bit and people will really realize that they have to prioritize themselves and their health, honestly, before anything else. Because if you don't have that, you can't wake up every day and be the best founder or business owner if you're not feeling your best to do it.
Yeah. And for a lot of us, if you don't work, you don't get paid. So it's like you have to honor that and make sure that you have that available to you.
Exactly.
This has been awesome. I've really, really enjoyed chatting with you. Any other comments, words of wisdom you want to toss out there before we sign off?
My gosh, last words of wisdom. I would just say that is such a tough question, but
It is.
you
It's
know, I
probably the hardest one, honestly.
it's the hardest one. Well, because it's a lot of pressure to kind of give that advice, but I would say if we kind of think about all of the key points that we touched on, to me, it all just comes back to believing in yourself as a founder and feeling the confidence to consistently put that messaging out there over and over again, build your community, build your tribe. And I really think that is one of the biggest keys to success is building that community around your brand.
Honestly, like nailed it. Well done. There you go. There's your words of wisdom. Perfect.
Just a summary of everything that we discussed.
Oh, I love it. It's so true. But thank you so much for joining. This has been so fun, and I look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Thank you so much for having me.